Hey everyone, this is Joshua Fletcher with DS Layer. Welcome to another edition of the Visible Layer. And today what I want to cover is setting up single sign-on with Active Directory using BI4. And the process has changed a little bit. You might have caught my blog post a while back for XI3.1. I thought I'd do a bit of an update and do a video walkthrough as well. So sit back and I'll be doing a step-by-step, starting from scratch, how to set up BI4 business objects with Active Directory for single sign-on. So the first thing I want to cover is the setup that I'm using. And I'm using Amazon EC2 to run two servers, one being my domain controller, set up with Active Directory and DNS, and the second one being my business object server. So I'm remote desktoped onto my Active Directory server, and I just thought I'd run through some of the standard configuration that I've set up. So the domain is actually called domain.internal, very original, and it's a fully qualified domain name. I'm going to be using a service account called BI Service with a password of password1. I'm also going to be using these two servers, as I mentioned, and there's the names of both of them. And I'm going to be creating a group called user group, which I'm going to add a test user into, and we're going to test a single sign-on with that user. You can see here I've got an open Internet Explorer window to my BI4 server.domain.internal. So there's a CMC, so that's already installed, and here's my remote desktop to that server as well. So step one, let's create our service account. I'm going to go into my Active Directory users. And normally you could request your Active Directory administrator to do this as well. And I'm going to create a new user called BI Service. So we'll call it BI Service. And the password is, as I said, password1 with a capital P. And we'll set that to never expires. Okay, now let's move across to our business object server. And what I want to do is, under computer management, add that user to my local administrators group. So here's my local groups, and we'll add my user BI Service. And then what I also want to do is go into my local security policy, and I will hopefully be able to find it because it's Windows 2008. There we go. Local security policy and admin tools. And what I want to do is, under the user rights assignment, I have this right act as part of the operating system, and I want to add or give my BI Service account that particular right act as part of the operating system. Step two, let's go back to our Active Directory server, and now I'm going to run some commands. So let's just go to the root drive, and what I'm going to run is a command that's normally installed on the Active Directory server and is part of Active Directory administration tools called set SPN, which is really creating service principal names. And they're basically a pointer that allows Tomcat to talk to Active Directory. So I'm going to run the command set SPN A for add, and I'm going to call my first one for BI CMS, and it's basically going to be my service account, like that. And you can see that's the correct message that comes back, that it's registered that service principal name and it's updated the object. So let's add our second one. And this one's going to be for Tomcat specifically. So and I just forgot one thing here. It needs to be BI4 server. So it's the business object server where the web application is installed, linking it to my service account. And last but not least, I'm going to do exactly the same, except I'm now going to fully qualify the server address. Great. Now what we can do is just verify that those service principal names have been created correctly by doing a list of our SPNs for the BI service account. You can see there we've got the 2 HTTP ones for the BI4 server, one fully qualified, and then one for the BI CMS. So, step 3. Let's go back into our Active Directory users and computers, and what we're going to do is just modify our BI service user, our service account. So let's just go into the properties. And what we're specifically looking for is this delegation tab. And what we need to do is trust this user for delegation to any service, Kerberos only. So let's choose that and click apply. And that's step 3. Now while we're here, I just want to show that I've also got a test user. Let's open him up. And that's going to be my user I use to test my single sign-on. And what I also have is a user group called user group that has my admin, BI service, and test user in it. So I will add this into the business objects CMC in the next step, and all these users will come in. Now, step 4. Let's open up our CMC. And we want to log on as our enterprise administrator or business objects administrator. And what we're going to do is enable our Active Directory authentication and add in some of the configuration we've set up already. So we go to the authentication area and we open up Windows Active Directory. And we first of all enable Windows Active Directory. We then have to set up our AD configuration summary. So the first thing we do is click here, and what we want to enter here is our domain BI service with its password. And again, we want to put in here the default domain, and that we want to make sure is fully qualified. We then want to type in the group that we want to map in with its users into business objects, which is my domain user group. Now, scrolling down, authentication options, I want to make sure I switch to use Kerberos authentication, not NTLM. And we then need to put in the service principal name that we defined in step 2. So that was the BI CMS, BI service.domain.internal. And we need to make sure that enable single sign-on is selected. Down the bottom, I've got a few options around how my users get created in business objects. What I want to do is make sure that the new aliases are created when alias update occurs. And I now want to make sure new users are created as named users. So there's my test user and my BS service user, and I should find that on my administrator account I have my administrator alias mapped to my administrator account. Okay, step 5, let's go back to our business object server, and we want to open up the central configuration manager. And what we need to do is stop our server intelligence agent. You can see here that it's running, so I'm just going to stop that, and it's going to stop your business object server. So make sure you tell your users before you do this. And what we're going to do is change that service from running as a local account to our BI service account. This is required for single sign-on to work. So we're going to turn off the log on a system account, and we're going to change that to our domain, if I can spell it right, BI service. And then we're going to start that back up. Now I'll wait a little while for it to initialize all the servers, and we're going to move on to step 6, which is testing that we can log on to local client tools. So let's see if it worked by opening up Web Intelligence and seeing if we can single sign on with our user. So I'll just select the universe, and I'll choose Windows AD for the authentication. I won't put in my username and password, but I'll click log on. And this is the test to see if all the steps we've taken to date have been successful. You can see there that it logged me on. I've now got access to the universes, and it's logged me on as the administrator user, which is what I'm logged on to the server as. So our single sign-on is working. So let's move straight on to step 7. And this is creating a couple of files that we need to get the single sign-on for Tomcat working. So the first thing we need to do is create a new folder, typically. You can change this with settings, but easiest is just to have a Windows folder. Depending on the version you're using, you might not have a Windows folder, so easiest thing to do is just create one. We're going to create 2 text files. The first one's going to be called BCS logging, and I'm just going to change the folder option so I can see the extension. We don't want it to be a text file, we want it to be a extension of CONF. So we'll just open this up with Notepad, and this is going to have the following text in it. Okay, so we put all that text into that file and save it. And we want one more file called krb5.ini. Alright, and in this one we want to put in the definition of our domain. I will point out that obviously you don't really want to be typing all this each time, so I'm going to be also putting step by step onto my blog, geek2live.net, and I'll put a link in when we post up this video as well, so then you can just reference that as well and copy and paste, which I probably should have done. Alright, so key things here are that we have our domain. We've got some standard options here that we include, and then we specify again our domain internal, and we specify the domain controllers. Mine's AD server, and then the default domain. So now that we've created that krb5ini file, what we can do is actually test that it's been set up correctly by navigating to the following folder. It's our program files for SAP BusinessObjects, XR41 or 40, Win64, JDK bin. Basically the Java directory. What we want to do is do a KInit with one of our users, so I'll use my BI service. And it'll ask me for credentials, so I'll put in my password, and it should come back and give us this. A new ticket has been stored in the cache file. So we know that file's been set up correctly. Okay, so let's move on to step 8. What we want to do now is open up our central configuration manager. We're still on the business object server, and we want to stop Tomcat. We're going to make some changes to Tomcat itself and its configuration. The first thing we want to do is open up our my computer, and we want to navigate to the Business Objects folder and to Tomcat itself. We want to go into the Web Apps folder. BOE is our main web application file that gets deployed now. So it's changed quite a bit since XI3.1, and we'll actually have we need to create a folder here. Sorry, in config, we want to go into the custom folder and create a new file here. So let's call it a new text document. We're going to call it BI Launchpad.properties. So for those that remember in XI3.1, we used to do a lot of the configuration through the web XML files. With BI4, we now have these .property folders, or files, I should say, where we can put our configuration in, our custom configuration. So we're just going to put two things in for now. I am typing a little bit too fast and misspelling things. Authentication.visible is equal to true. So first of all, for business objects, for the BI Launchpad, we want to make sure that the authentication dropdown, let's just use Enterprise or Windows AD, is visible. And then we also want to specify that the default authentication method is Windows AD instead of Enterprise. So we'll just save that there. And the second thing we want to do is go into our program files. Under Tomcat, there's Tomcat configuration. We're going to go in there and we want to go, let's pull this back over here, into the Java tab. And under the Java options section, we want to add some lines to the bottom. First one is going to be java.security authentication login configuration config is equal to, we want to point it to that bsc login.configuration file we created earlier. Where do you think the second one's going to point? It's going to point to our krb5ini file. So let's just put in the line for that, which is krb5.config conf Windows krb5ini. Okay, so we'll just apply that. Just double check it's okay. And what we want to now do is start Tomcat. Alright, so let's switch back to our AD box. And we want to navigate to the BI4 server, the BI Launchpad. Okay, so now that we're at the BI Launchpad, let's choose Windows Active Directory, and we'll try and authenticate with our administrator user. So, manual single sign-on is working. We can actually type in our Active Directory username. As long as we're in that user group, then we can manually sign in to business objects with Active Directory. So that concludes step 8. Okay, on to step 9. What we're going to have to do is stop Tomcat again. We're going to do some further configuration. Now we know manual authentication is working. We want to set up single sign-on that is silent. So effectively we get passed through with our user without having to type in anything. So we'll stop Tomcat, and we need to modify some of Tomcat's configuration. So we'll remain in the program files for business objects for Tomcat, but this time we're going to go into the conf folder, and we're going to modify the server.xml. So what I'm going to do is just take a backup of that file. So we want to modify this server XML file now. We want to do it with WordPad, not Notepad, and we want to find the connector string for port 8080, which is our default HTTP. So you can see it here, connector port 8080. What we want to do is go to the end of that, and within the tag, what we want to do is put in a new variable, which is HTTP max HTTP header size. is going to be equal to 65536. Effectively, we're increasing the length of the header so it can accommodate their credentials for single sign-on. So we'll now just save that file. And what we want to now go is go back into our, where we were before in the web apps, under BOE, WebInf, config custom. We want to create another file, and we're going to call this one global.properties. And this is where we put several of the tags that used to be in the web.xml file in XR31. So first of all, SSO is enabled. Which means SiteMinder is disabled. Vintella is enabled. And we also want to put in the IDM tags as well, which is for the silent single sign-on. So first of all, the realm needs to be in uppercase, and our fully qualified domain name, domain.internal. We also want the print, which is our service account, BI service. We want to allow unsecured is equal to true. Allow NTLM is equal to false. Logger name is equal to simple, and the logger properties is equal to that file. Okay, so now that we've created the global.properties, again, just quickly verify that that's correct. We now want to go into our Tomcat options, Tomcat configuration where we were before. We've got a few more extra lines to add to the Java options. Two more com wedge tail. So the wedge tail tag is quite important. What this does is allow us to embed the password for our service account into the Java options, so it can communicate with Active Directory. Now, once we get it working, we can remove this and encode that password into a file that's not readable. So obviously, if someone got access to the server via a remote desktop, they could actually open up the Java options and see the password for that user. But for testing purposes, to make sure that we're setting up correctly, it's the easiest way to do it. All right. So we've added these two, one for debugging Kerberos and also this wedge tail line where we're actually embedding the password for the service account. Okay, the last step that we want to do is to actually go back into our Tomcat folder, and under logs we want to get rid of all the logs. So I'm going to delete those. Now that we've done that, let's start up Tomcat. Wait for it to initialize, and then what we're going to do is check the log files to make sure that the server is actually being communicated with, the Active Directory server, and then we can test our single sign-on. So now that Tomcat started up, let's have a look at our standard out. What we should be able to do here is do a find, and we want to search for credentials. And this is exactly what we're looking for. Credentials have been attained for our service account, BI service at domain.internal. So we can see Tomcat is communicating with Active Directory. So now what we want to do is test our single sign-on and navigate to our BI4 Launchpad. And you can see this time it's actually passed my username and password to Active Directory, authenticated me, and signed me in. So we can see there that we now have silent single sign-on working correctly, and that's now step 9 finished. Okay, moving on to step 11, what we want to do is now create a key tab file. what the key tab allows us to do is remove that wedge tail option from the Java options in Tomcat, where we've hard-coded our password for our service account, and instead we're going to encrypt that password into a key tab file, which we then get Tomcat to reference when it's authenticating with that Active Directory. So I'm just on the domain controller, my AD server, and what I want to do is run this command here, basically kt pass. It generates a key tab file. We're specifying our principal BI service for domain.internal with the password, and when we click that, it's going to generate, you can see here, it's outputted the key tab to bosso key tab. So what we now want to do is copy that to the C drive Windows folder of our business object server. So here's my bosso.key tab. So if we just open up another, we can copy a key tab file to our server. So now let's go to our business object server. What we want to do is stop Tomcat again. And there's now, we want to modify that global properties file that we created before. So if we just go to our C drive, Tomcat, Web Apps, BOE, WebInf, config and custom, we want to edit our global properties again. And this time what we want to do is add one more line. idm.keytab is equal to C drive Windows bosso.keytab. Notice the forward slashes. I think that is specifically required for this particular line. So we want to save that file. We then want to go into our Tomcat configuration again, into the Java options, and we want to remove that wedge tail line completely. Apply that. Let's then back into our CCM and restart Tomcat, and once that's initialized, we'll again test single sign-ons working correctly. Again, navigate to our BI4 server to the BI Launchpad and see if it single signs us in. And there you have it. So we've now configured silent single sign-on with Active Directory for Business Objects BI4 using an encrypted key tab file, so we're not hard coding our password. There's one more step that I want to cover, step 12, and that's just tidying up our debugging. So if we go back into our Business Object Server, last time we're going to stop Tomcat. We're going to go back into our Java Tomcat configuration in the Java options, and what we want to do is just remove this debug true line. And we want to go back into our C drive Windows folder, and with the BSC login file we created, we want to edit that and remove the debug true there as well. Okay, so that's single sign-on done. Just want to remind you that I'm going to be posting up instructions step by step on this as well, so that will be combined with the video tutorial, hopefully as a walkthrough. But I want to make sure that you're all aware that all of these instructions are found in a SAP note. It's quite a few more pages, and it's got a lot more about troubleshooting. So it's a really great SAP note, and this is just a condensed version of it to help you see how it works end to end. That SAP note is 1631734. I'd like to thank you for your time today, and I hope you've got something valuable out of this walkthrough of Active Directory single sign-on with BI4. Thanks.
This podcast is hosted and sponsored by EV Technologies. Visit us on the net at SaveTheCMO.